Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to Nectar, Sex, and Soul. I'm your host, Soraya Leonora, and I'm a holistic sex and relationship coach. This is a chance for us to get intimate, to reach far into the mystical, magical, erotic, tender, inspiring, vital, primordial depths of what it is to be human, what it is to express and inhabit these amazing bodies fully, and what it is to make love to the divine in everything we do. We'll be penetrating deeply into the nectar of what it is to be alive and turned on by life, how to transmute pain and hardship into pleasure and medicine, how to embody the union of polarities, including sex and spirit, and how to love every piece of ourselves wholeheartedly. This is a space where we don't just talk about the act of sex, but rather how sexual energy permeates every area of our lives as the seed of creation and the source from which we all came. Exploring sexuality in this way not only takes our sex lives to the next level, but is a catalyst for a life that turns us on in each and every moment, not just in the bedroom. Within you stirs a sexual vitality that is capable of so much more than you could possibly imagine. This is what we explore on Nectar, Sex, and Soul. Thanks for coming to play. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Nectar, Sex, and Soul. I'm Soraya Leonora, and today I have a guest who I'm really excited to drop in with about a topic that is very personal and near and dear to my heart. And I've actually been really looking for the right person to have this conversation with because it's such an important one. I think it's often really under discussed in the realm of sexuality and pleasure. And there can be all this focus on like, oh, look at all these women having all this amazing pleasure who are just like turned on all the time. And that's not the case for a lot of women. And it certainly was not the case for me. Many of you know the story of how I got into this work. And for those of you who don't, just a short overview of it, I hit just a mountain of chronic illness in my early 20s that I think had been culminating over the course of my lifetime. And with that, I lost my libido. I was experiencing pain during sex, and I really lost my zest for life. And that was kind of my first clue into the connection between sexual energy and vitality. And you know, this is a journey that has been ongoing for me. And one of the things I really appreciate about the guest who I will introduce to you in just a moment is her candid way of speaking about her own journey with this. And I'm really excited for us to get to share more about our journeys with all of you and to just speak to the fact that moving through health issues, feminine burnout, being a human in the Western world who is constantly in go mode and maintaining a healthy sexuality and vitality and relationships in a well-balanced life. That is not like a point of destination where it's like, okay, I'm there, I'm good, I achieved it, and this is never a problem for me again. I really see it as a maintenance practice. It's like if we've been patterned in a way to be an overachiever, to overwork ourselves, it's a deconditioning process and a maintenance practice of using the tools and the practices that we have and listening to our bodies and coming back to that wisdom, similarly to how, you don't just work out for a year straight and then you reach your peak physical condition and you're like, okay, I'm here, I don't have to work out anymore. It's an ongoing reworking of your relationship with self and the changes that life brings. And so I'm really excited to dive into all topics connected to burnout, sexual dysfunction, being powerful women in the world who are trying to cultivate balance in our lives. And I want to invite everybody to pay attention to this episode because even if you're not a woman, I guarantee you have at least one woman in your life who is struggling with this, who could use support and understanding in what she's navigating. If you're a man whose wife doesn't want to have sex with you very often, whose partner doesn't want to have sex, who feels irritable, who is spread thin, who you're wondering what happened to how our relationship used to be before she started her business or before she became a mom or whatever it is, this episode is going to be really enlightening for you to know how to best show up for the women in your life, and to understand this from a very holistic perspective. So this episode also piggybacks a little bit off of the last one I did with Shri Namaste, for those of you who heard this one, where I think in a lot of ways, the modern world has given women permission to be men in the world, but not to do things in a feminine way. And there are a lot of women who have started businesses, who have become, very powerful women in the world, but have burned themselves out by doing things in a more masculine, overly yang way, rather than in a way that is true and authentic to, what it is to be the woman that they are. So without further ado, I introduce Dr. Jordin Wiggins to you all. I'm so happy to have her here. She is a naturopathic doctor, feminine burnout and pleasure coach. And Jordin, thank you for being here. I'm going to just pass it off to you to share a little bit about who you are and what your work is in this world.
Thank you so much for having me. Everything that you were saying in that intro, I was like, yes, yes, just cannot wait to dive in. So, summary, I help successful, burnt out women have better sex, better health, and more wealth, because they are all connected. That, love that you said that sex and vitality piece, because take you back to my journey. I had struggled with mental health, anxiety, and depression during my pre-med degree. And I was a very yin, very feminine soul in a extremely masculine environment for many, many years, and was so burnt out and just completely lost touch with my sexuality for the first time. And I remember the solutions being offered to me. Take an antidepressant, take birth control, things that, and again, I'm not against the right medication when it works for the right person, but for me, I knew it was more than that. I knew there was something different. I lost touch with this piece of myself, my vitality, and I started on a journey to get it back, which led me to become a naturopathic doctor and approach mental health, hormones, burnout, and cortisol dysfunction from a very different perspective. So I opened a women's health clinic, which I closed the physical clinic space a couple of weeks ago, which has been a very bittersweet process, but it was to pivot my business in line with the feminine and my dream and my mission. And being stuck in an old model with like $20,000-$30,000 of overhead a month. And like, why? Wow. Right?
Yeah.
Why?
Oh my God. That's a lot.
I know. So I started just back to the beginning, and I had thousands of women telling me the same thing. I'm not as happy as I used to be. I have it. Like, I've got the career, the house, the kids. Like, I got what I thought I should want, and I'm still not happy. I'm stuck. I'm in a rut. I don't feel like having sex. Like, they were just lost, and medically I would call it anhedonic. Anhedonia is a medical term that we use to describe somebody that doesn't feel joy or pleasure. And it is a diagnostic criteria of major depressive disorder. But what I was noticing is that this was an experience, like a collective experience for thousands and thousands of women. So I went, oh, so this isn't just me. Because kind of I was in my silo, some shame, some guilt, like I work out, I eat pretty well, I'm doing a pre-med degree, want to be a doctor. Like, why am I struggling so much? Yeah. Also, so, and this is about the journey, right? That it's not a destination that we get to, and it's like a box we've ticked, even though as over-functioning women, high-achieving women, we like to cross those items off the to-do list. It feels good. But it's the journey. So I had also had Bartholin cysts, which this is something many women struggle with, but because there is so much shame around women's sexual health and wellness, we don't talk about it. And then once I started talking about it, I couldn't believe the number of my patients and other women that were like, me too. But you feel alone during the whole process. So anyway, a cyst in your vagina, they need to operate on it and stitch it. So it's like an episiotomy in a way, where like your vaginal tissue is disrupted and then they're stitching it and then there's scar tissue and things aren't feeling the same, or then there's pain with sex.
Right.
So then that led me down a whole other journey about my libido and my sexuality and my relationship just to myself as a woman and my sexuality. Third kind of stage or evolution of my growth was pregnancy, was becoming a mom, and all of the things that I had dealt with and thought I'd healed and was good brings up a whole new level of, you know, being needed and being a caregiver and, you know, who am I as a mother now instead of this, you know, business owner doctor that works 70, 80 hour weeks and, you know, has a super successful medical practice. And then it was like, I don't want that anymore. Like, I just don't want it. And I was also pregnant in COVID. So sort of the world was slowing down at the same time that I was. And it was a wild experience to be pregnant, find out you're pregnant a couple weeks before the whole world shuts down, and then not know if you go outside or contract it, what's going to happen to the baby growing inside you.
Oh my God.
So I really use that time to kind of create my new path, my new direction. And it was about busting up. I do not want to be in this masculine healthcare model anymore where I'm pumping through patients and like it didn't feel right. You know, and you see all these patients to justify your massive overhead of running a big medical clinic. And it was just like, this just doesn't fit. It's just not aligned. And who am I? And what's my purpose on this planet? And it was so aligned that COVID made so many advances medically, because now telemedicine is huge and kind of like a new standard of care. And groups, doing group health or doing my sex, pleasure, relationship coaching in groups became, because my clients were just craving connection when we were all isolated at home. So I started to do things in groups and was just like, even this morning, I had a group call, and the healing, like the reconnecting to our feminine and to those parts that we've disowned so long ago because society tells us to or doesn't value the yin feminine traits, to be in a room, to be on a call with other women that feel the same is so therapeutic and so healing. And it just, I'm just so grateful that it all happened the way it did, because it really changed the trajectory of what I do.
Yeah. Oof. Yeah, I can relate. When COVID happened, I was actually in such adrenal fatigue. I was in such burnout at the time, and I wouldn't have slowed down unless the world stopped, and then it did. And so it was just that collective pause that I think was so needed for so many people.
Yeah.
And
so many people unraveled in a way, or we needed to kind of like burn it down, break it down, and then rebuild and start over.
Absolutely. And there was the part of me that, you know, the over giver, overachiever part that was like, I need to be, you know, contributing something. Everyone's like leading these free events right now. Everyone's like showing up to support the community. And my body was like, fuck no, you're going to sleep for 11 hours a night, every night for the next few months. Like it was like a power down on my system that I don't think I would have given myself permission for had we not been in this weird place. And then, you know, I also shifted my business largely from in-person to online, not entirely. But I agree with you that the groups, I think a lot of people think that they need to navigate something around their sexuality privately in a one-on-one container, which can be a beautiful and rich experience. And the groups really offer that awareness that, oh my God, I'm not alone in this. And just like you said, that the cysts you were dealing with, and, you know, I've dealt with so many issues with my own sexuality and my own vagina and all these things that it's like people keep to themselves. And when you recognize like, wow, everyone's kind of navigating their own journey with this, and I'm not alone, and it's not shameful or embarrassing. There's such a power in that can be revealed.
Yeah, I'm so grateful because it allowed me to pause too. I knew I didn't want to continue down that trajectory, but it's like you build this machine and it's so hard to get off of it in a way.
Yeah. Yes.
But COVID allowed that pause, that regroup, and allowed me to create something different, which is one-on-one coaching and women's groups for Superwoman. So we should probably talk about that a bit, because I think a lot can relate. And when you talked about like the men that wonder what happened to their wife before they started the business, or the kids. And I think we lose a lot of superwomen in those transitions. And what a superwoman is to me is a very high achieving, people pleasing, over functioning woman who will do everything for everyone at the expense of caring for herself. And what that looks like a little more practically is, you know, we sign up for the gym membership or the yoga membership, but then as soon as life gets busy or other people need us, our businesses need us, our personal self-care stuff is the first thing to go.
Yep. Absolutely.
And I mean, I'm saying these things with love because I am a superwoman, recovering, whichever way you want to put it. But I know because I've been there, and that's how I was raised too. Yes. So we like to do things right, you know, get good grades in school, or look for that approval, either from our clients if we're self-employed, or from our bosses if we're kind of in the corporate world, where like we're constantly outsourcing that. We want that approval, we want that validation, like great job, because usually from when we were little, that's how we were shown love, was through praise and achieving.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Right? We didn't get praise
Absolutely.
for just being. We didn't get
Right.
praise for feeling big feelings. In fact, it was probably the opposite. Like, don't cry
Yes.
and go get an A.
Yeah. The feminine qualities are very under-celebrated in our culture.
So
Absolutely.
by being an overgiver, overfunctioner, people pleaser, you try and do things right, you try and give it 110 all day, every day, that predisposes us to burnout. Where Superwomen will get in a burnout cycle. And we will inevitably have some type of crash that happens. And I would say that what you described for COVID, where you were sleeping for 11 hours a day, that would be like a mini crash. But that was your body just saying, like, we're shutting her down. We need to rest. We need to restore. Sometimes the crash can look like a breast cancer diagnosis. Sometimes the crash can look like migraines, cyclical migraines that women can get. But something that's kind of like knocking us out, taking us out, chronic health issues.
Yep.
So we'll rest when we crash, but then we're kind of back to it. All the same tendencies, the overgiving, the people pleasing, the trying our hardest until we crash again. But what we're not good at. Go ahead.
I was going to say what's so ironic about it is it's like I've had to learn this lesson time and time again. The overdrive that I put myself into to get it done faster, to be more efficient, gets completely obliterated and canceled out by the burnout that takes longer to recover from than if you had just gone at a sustainable pace and avoided the burnout altogether. And so I think sometimes we think like, if I just push harder, if I just go faster, I'll get there faster. And it's not linear. And that crash will come and set us back. And then the time that we have to spend recovering, just completely weighed out the grind that we put in to get it done faster.
It's so true. And when you say it, a Superwoman could hear it and she'll be like, oh, that makes sense. Why do I do that? But it's like a gear that we don't have to rest, to take time off just because then we'll feel guilty. Because I'll ask clients all the time, or women that I'm on calls with, like, can you rest without guilt? Can you celebrate? Like, I had a client the other day say, we just had the biggest month ever in my business. And I was on the call, got the numbers with my team, and I was like, okay, great. And then I moved on. And she's like, and then when you asked, do I celebrate? Or she heard me talking about it on a podcast or something. She's like, I don't. I'm just on to the next thing, faster, more efficient. And it's no wonder we burn out. And it's almost like our body is trying to force us to listen. Like, we're stubborn. Like, okay, well, if you're not going to rest, if you're not going to celebrate and feel joy and do all these things, then I'm going to take you out. You need to rest. So whatever form that looks like, we have some type of forced rest.
Yeah, and the celebration would have been way more fun if we had taken the initiative to do that instead.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's in the body. I heard somebody say once, I don't remember where I heard this, something along the lines of autoimmune disease happens when the spirit gets too far ahead from the body and kind of leaves the body behind. And I can really relate to that, where I often feel like even though embodiment is such a huge piece of my work, and I love movements and I love all the embodiment practices. I often don't have the fuel to back my inspirations. And if I'm not careful, I can really run myself into the ground. And what I love about your work, Jordin, and the very holistic approach that you take with this is like, you know, you talk about how it's like, it's not just mindset, it's not just hormones. It's like you have to be bridging both worlds, and you can be learning all the things, you can be doing the embodiment practices, but if you're like squeezing those embodiment practices into a very full to-do list and you're grinding and you're on constant go mode, you're still going to burn out. Your body's still going to flare up in various different sexual dysfunctions. And for those of you who didn't listen to the sexual dysfunction episode I did a while back, go listen to that one, because I really see sexual dysfunctions as like, it's our body's way of being like, hey, something's out of alignment here. You haven't been listening, and I'm speaking up about it. And all these health things that we deal with are, you know, culminations of not listening to the body. And then it comes to a head and forces us to listen. And when we've gone to that point, when we've pushed ourselves into such burnout, that our adrenals are fried, that our chi is depleted, that our hormones are all imbalanced, it's not enough to just be like, oh, I'm just going to do some embodiment practices. Like, you have to take a more holistic approach, and you have to address the physical and the spiritual and the whole spectrum in between. And so I love that, you know, as somebody who has a background in medicine, you do weave in the pleasure and the mindset, and you bridge that gap, because that's something that is so essential, that most doctors like have no idea what's going on when it comes to pleasure and sexuality. Like how you were talking about like the options that were being offered to you. I mean, I just remember like the most outrageous things that certain doctors were saying or dismissing, or it was just unbelievable. And so it was really what led me into the work I do today, was to learn my own body and different ways that I can approach this. But I also work extensively with a Chinese medicine doctor, because that physical component is so necessary after living a life of pushing myself past my limits. So I love that you work from all angles in that way.
Thank you for mentioning that, because that was one of my biggest learnings, that it was both, and one without the other doesn't work. So I thought graduating, opening my clinic, I was going to balance everyone's hormones and get them on dietary plans that like work for their specific body and their specific conditions and life stage. Cause that's another thing that, you know, what is good for you to eat at 20 is different than postpartum, is different than menopausal. And I find we really suck at that with women's health. We're not.
Oh yeah.
We don't flow with the life stage. We get these rigid linear treatment protocols. It just doesn't work. So I thought, you know, I'm gonna balance everyone's hormones, make sure they're not inflamed. I see a lot of women with autoimmune disease because, again, burnout, Superwoman, it's all connected.
Right.
And it's going to be amazing. And I was very, very good at the health side. And you know what happened? The anhedonia, so that like lack of joy, or that like, there's something missing. I don't have as much joy, pleasure. And of course they wouldn't put it in those words, but my patients would say to me, like, I'm just not as happy as I used to be, or something still feels a little off. So they would be sleeping better. The weight would come off. Their menstrual cycles would be pain-free for the first time in their life. But they would say, like, there's still something missing. So is that anhedonia or it was sexual dysfunction? And sexual dysfunction, pain with sex, difficulty orgasming or not being able to orgasm, arousal issues, so getting in the mood, and like desire issues as well, which when you're on all the time in go mode, we know they've researched in a sympathetic nervous state, so in fight or flight, they've done MRIs and the pleasure centers in your brain are turned off, turned way down. So we wonder, superwomen wonder, like, what happened to me? What happened to my wife? Like, she's not the same. The stress, the being on all the time, the people pleasing, all of these tendencies, it's literally turning down that pleasure dial, our ability to receive pleasure. So when we are relaxed, and this is sometimes why vacation sex works for people, because they're not looking at the to-do list, the pressures of the day-to-day aren't on them. So they're in parasympathetic, their pleasure centers are on. So a touch from their partner can feel so much more arousing. But it's a Thursday evening or a Friday evening after you've worked all week and cared for the kids or done whatever, and you're in sympathetic, you're in fight or flight, a touch is like, ugh, like, get away from me. Like, not now. Because we're just not in that nervous system state to be able to receive pleasure. So being the superwoman perfectionist that I was like, well, I need to solve this problem, because everything else, and I would track it like any good superwoman, I would track it, and all of their concerns are improving, but not the anhedonia and not the sexual dysfunction. So then I started on that journey. Which is where we need both. We need the mindset, we need the embodiment practice, and we need to couple it with the like advanced medical cellular stuff.
Absolutely. And it's like when you're in go mode, when you're in that young penetrative energy. And so there is no space to be penetrated by your partner. You're not in a receptive state. You're not open to that pleasure. And I think that this is something that we really have to work to decondition. Like you said, a lot of women who feel guilty resting, or I know for me, it's a constant like retraining of my nervous system to really give myself long periods of space, like a full real day off where I'm not doing anything. And there's that pull in the back of my mind that it's like, and I think it's tricky too when you're so passionate about your work, because you love it and it inspires you and it lights you up, but you have to be in balance with it. And so sometimes I can find it's hard to turn my brain off around the things that I'm so inspired and excited to create. But that creating, that giving, it's still that yang energy. And so the feminine exists in the spaciousness. And that's where like beautiful inspiration and insight comes through, is when you actually have that parasympathetic space to just be, to receive downloads, to be in that well-nourished space, and then to refill your cup so you can give from that space. And I think that's a space that so many women don't have enough of, and that we have to really condition ourselves to feel okay and at peace with resting, with just being, with not having anything that we need to accomplish or anything on the agenda.
I agree. And I teach it like training. Because if your nervous system state, if you are used to being in that sympathetic state with things to do on all the time, the parasympathetic feels foreign. Not to mention then our cultural societal conditioning of, if you sit down and put your feet up while everyone else cleans up the kitchen after dinner, then you're lazy, or you're not good partner or mother, etc. comes in. So being is almost like practicing being in the parasympathetic and how much we can tolerate. Because when we turn down and we numb like the bad emotions, we numb the good ones too. the joy, the excitement. And we're living in this like small little range that's very blah. And sometimes we use busyness, sometimes we use porn, sometimes we use food to medicate or numb. And then when we start doing the work, start practicing being in the parasympathetic, the amount of crap that can come up that we've shoved down or we've numbed for years and years. It's almost one of those, like, we need to go through the darkness first before the light situations, or I describe it like a clamped fire hose, where if we've like shut down feelings, pleasure, joy, that kind of stuff, and then we take that pressure off, there's just so much backup of crap that we have to get out, sort through. And it's like, okay, well, wait a minute. So I'm listening to the podcast and I read the book and it totally makes sense and it totally speaks to me, but I struggle to implement. Like, I struggle to do the being, to do the relaxing. I struggle to ask for the help. I struggle to block time off in my calendar when I could be more efficient. So it's not only the practice I find of doing the things, it's changing our beliefs, like rewiring, making new neural pathways around what those things mean and what they serve for our health and well-being and our ability to be in happy, connected relationships and have amazing sex.
Absolutely. Absolutely. To decondition the belief that like we have to be doing something to be worthy, or we have to earn our rest and our pleasure as a reward rather than as a resource. And it's really interesting to, so, one of the things that I speak to a lot is we have to expand our capacity for what we're willing to feel. Like you said, a lot of people, like there's this little sliver that they're willing to experience. And it's like, if we can't feel our rage and our grief, our pleasure is also going to be dimmed down. But, I often talk about this from the perspective of high intensity sensation, whether it's, conflict or sexual energy, like, speaking to this in the context of teaching men a non-ejaculatory orgasm, where that pressure builds and they want to shoot it out of their body, and it's high intensity to let it move through their system and not shoot it out, or to let the intensity of a conflict be there without needing to scream or become avoidant. But it's really interesting to put that in the perspective of how uncomfortable being in the parasympathetic can be as well. Because we often think of high intensity as like, oh, there's something like really fiery intense here. And I think like that beingness has its completely own flavor of intensity, where people are worried they're going to be like bored or restless or feel empty, or like they should be doing something. And that's like a totally different type of intensity that we have to train our nervous system to be able to just soften into.
Yeah. I had a client message me, busy physician, mom, other stuff going on, COVID. They had COVID. So isolated in the first few days. And we worked together for a while. So we're training that being muscle and tolerating the intensity of being. I like the way you phrase that. So the first few days was amazing. She's like, this is a blessing. We're watching TV. I'm chilling. I cleared my calendar. Like, this is great. And then messages of just like landmines and thoughts and fights she picked and it is, and that's what I mean about when we're like learning to slow down, learning to tolerate being slow, and then it becomes dealing with the crap that comes up.
Yes.
So that's the teachings. Is not only how do we reframe this so that we're able to and behind it, because like you talked about doing an embodiment practice, but like in the masculine, or I'll talk about, that person that shows up to yoga late in a rush, slams their mat down, right? Like they do the class and they're like, getting every pose. And it is very much that yang energy, that yang flavor. And
right.
It's very different than someone who has the space and took the time and like noticed the trees or the sky on their way in, or maybe had time to send a text of gratitude to someone important in their life. And it's just two completely different states of being. And my client, right, you start to create problems. You start to try and get yourself back in that sympathetic nervous state, finding projects around the house to do, picking fights, like, because we really don't know how to tolerate being, and beyond tolerate it, like learn to enjoy it and find the restorative parts of it.
Right. Yeah, we try to seek what's comfortable. And, speaking to that person that rushes to yoga and slams the mat down, like, God, I've totally been that person. Same. Where I was like, this is so defeating the purpose of coming to do yoga, to fucking relax. And I'm like, rushing through traffic and freaking out to get here. And like, whoa, this is really counterproductive. And I think one of the things I love to emphasize in working with myself and with my clients is that we can shift our quality of being in anything that we are doing. And I think a lot of people like have a very clear separation in their mind of being versus doing. And I think what can be really helpful is to work with the practice of how are you being while you're doing the thing. So I know you talked about like women who are like going over their to-do list in their head while they're having sex. And so they're not like being present and receptive during sex. And then they're wondering, why can't I orgasm? Or if you're, 10 steps ahead of yourself, like thinking about how stressful it was to get there and thinking about what you have to do after while you're doing your yoga pose, you're not receiving the medicine of it because your state of being is erratic and it's not actually right here in what you're doing. So you could be, washing the dishes and be in this like really peaceful state of just being and like, oh, the warm water feels really nice on my hands and like it feels good to tend to my home. Or you could be like in this scattered place of like, fuck, I gotta get this done,
rushing,
and get to the next thing.
resentful, like I wish someone else could do this. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Completely different flavor. And so I think we can always invite in that quality of being into everything we're doing. And that's something I feel like I was hearing you speak to in other words in your podcast too, of like when you're, you talked about like asking the kids to do it, to help with the dishes without like it turning into a fight. And I think this is such an important thing to highlight because as women, when we're burned out, if we're like irritable and resentful, and then we're like learning that we need to start asking for help and delegating. But then the way we do that is with this tone. Yes. The tone and the irritation and the expectation. And it's like you have years of resentment built up for why didn't I ask for help before? And you're projecting that resentment onto everybody else, even though you never asked for it. And now you're like, well, I'm fucking asking for it, but you're being a bitch about it. And so nobody wants to help. And everyone, it's, resents you for being
the quality, like your state of being, you're repellent. No one wants to help somebody that's like demanding, needy, expectant. People want to be invited. And that's the essence of feminine energy, is invitation, inviting people in, inviting them on the journey with you. And when we are burnt out, it is so hard to do, which is why my groups were so amazing, because we could practice and train. And again, I would have never done this before COVID. So massive blessing. We get that out. We get the resentment, the we call it crusty. we often talk about, that's a term one of my coaches came up with, and we want to redo like our own feelings wheel with crusty on it and juicy, like as our kind of opposite poles.
Yeah, very accurate descriptions.
But when you're crusty, no one wants to help you. And to be able to,
and then it just becomes this self-perpetuating negative feedback.
Exactly. So when I ask for help, then I'm shut down, or no one's there for me. I'm all alone. Reiterating those well-worn patterns that we have, those beliefs. So it's amazing to talk about it and see how it's the same for so many other women, at their dynamics at work, their dynamics with their children, their dynamics in romantic relationship. When they're burnt out, what happens? And when we're burnt out and we have adrenal issues and cortisol dysfunction, we are the least likely to be able to tolerate a no. Because we are not resilient at all. Our cup is empty. We really are needy at that point. Right? Yes. And we don't want to admit it because it sounds like gross and not feminist and all those things. And we're these like smart, successful women, but like we are crusty at that point. And yeah, we are needy. We are demanding. We can't tolerate a no. And one of the things that we work on is obviously figuring out, what do I want? What do I need? And how do I ask for it in a way that fosters connection and invites people to help me with my vision or goal or task? So when we're burnt out, we suck at tolerating no. We're not resilient. Like when we are rested, full, overflowing, we have extra to give. So if somebody's like, nah, like, no, I don't want to help you with that. Or you say, can you do this? Like, and they say no, it's so much easier to tolerate it because we have extra to give. So it's just like, okay, like maybe it stung a little or you felt a little disappointed, but you're good. You have extra.
Right. You haven't driven yourself to that place of like an empty barrel at that point.
Yeah, like a desert barrel. Yeah. Where like in any drop anyone will give you, you take, you accept the crumbs at that point. So it does put us in a really gross cycle, really, with our relationships where we're over functioning and then those around us are allowed to underfunction.
Right.
So
that under functioning, I think like that, it creates this enabling pattern that is like, I think this is really important to address because you talked about the people pleasing women, and people pleasing is something I work on with almost every one of my clients. And it was such a huge part of my journey where you think you're helping somebody, but you're actually enabling them when it's coming at the expense of yourself. And it gives everyone else the excuse to be lazy. So you end up like raising these really spoiled kids who say, well, mom just does everything for me. I don't have to do anything. And a husband who sits on his ass and feels the same way. And then you get resentful. But that resentment is really about where you compromised yourself and then projected it onto the people around you. And then we get these women who are in this place of, you know, demanding love and support and in this very like kind of false yang energy, like this aggressive, like entitled, like it's like really intensely penetrative, and wondering like, why is my man not coming and ravishing me? Like, why am I not feeling desired? And it's like, well, you're not leaving any space for that. And you're coming at it forcefully rather than working with like that magnetizing, that inviting, that softening, that feels exciting and like nourishing to come support, that like people are just already inspired to come support you because you're in an energy that is inviting it, rather than like, oh God, if I go near her and say the wrong thing, she's going to flip out on me. It's like, I'll just let you do your thing over there. And so I think that's an interesting thing, because when we're these super women, we have this capacity to intuit other people's needs and we care deeply. But if we try to do everything for them at the expense of ourselves, and really like enable them rather than helping them to feel empowered in their own participation and helping them to understand how to respect our needs through respecting them first ourselves, then we slip into that like total martyrdom place that is just like absolutely repelling and the opposite of magnetic.
Yes, so lonely and not what we want. And yeah, we are left wondering, well, why isn't my man stepping up? Why aren't my kids helping? Oh, I had, so when we're talking about people pleasing and inviting and allowing people to have a yes and a no and not trying to like control it. The point of resistance that I get from my clients when we're talking about all this stuff is like, well, they won't do it right. They won't load the dishwasher right. They won't do blank right. And then, because that's the thing, right? We expect and strive for perfection from ourselves. So naturally, we would expect it from others. And I have to, we want to hit home the whole, well, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? Do you want to be right and burnt out or happy? So I find mixed in with that people pleasing stuff, we got to look at where's it coming from? Why do you struggle to step back and invite? Why is it hard for you to hear a no? Or if like you have that forceful penetrating energy, where's it all coming from? And how can we practice softening it?
Right. And to soften that tight grip on reality where we are in that sympathetic nervous system and we're trying to control everything, and recognizing that, I think delegating is one of the most important things we can do to come back into our feminine and to not micromanage, and to recognize that in delegating, they're not going to do it the same way that you would. They're going to do it slightly differently. They might not do it as well as you think you would, but that's part of the softening that is required for the receptive feminine, is like, to allow myself to receive, I have to loosen my grip on exactly how it looks. And
I talk about it all the time. Huge. I draw the parallels to sex. So people pleasing sex, and being the giver in that, like, it's amazing. It feels good to give your partner pleasure and watch them receive it. That feels good. That's a piece of great sex. But Superwomen that can't soften, open, receive, like, think of a vagina. That's the point, right? If we're like rigid and not inviting, like not a good environment, sex doesn't feel as good for either party. And sometimes I find the men that are like, they want more and they have this appetite for sex, what they want is to have their Superwoman in their receptive feminine. That's really what they're craving. They're craving this like nourishing sex, like that something's shifted sex. They're not craving the like, oh, well, I read this, 5 tips for good blowjobs on Instagram sex, and you're in your like Superwoman masculine, like, oh, step 1, stroke his inner thigh, check, and stuff to like, So that craving for that deeper connection in Superwomen, the burnt out Superwomen, and I know this, like, I'm divorced. This fucked up my can I swear on your podcast? Okay. Yes. I normally that is what absolutely. I ask. Like, can I say fuck, pussy? What can I say?
Anything you want.
I'm divorced, because I was in that false masculine, and what I had been taught to value and strive for and achieve wasn't what filled and nourished my soul at all. So I got there, I got all the things. I'll tell you, just we're being open and honest, but I wanted to run a medical, this was my goal, like when I was, I don't know, 18 or 20, but my goal was to open a medical clinic in my hometown and make $100,000 a year. Obviously, like helping people, but I'm just talking like high level Superwoman goal.
Right.
Like I wanted this women's clinic where women came and healed and did all this like amazing transformative stuff. But like, that's what I thought happiness was. Get a degree, get a doctorate, open an office, have staff. Like I'm actually feeling my pussy dry up as I'm saying these things. Like,
of course.
That was a recipe for burnout. My hormones were so messed up. I was getting acne. My hair was falling out. I wasn't sleeping. I had night sweats. Like it was literally so opposite of what I found nourishing. And it was fascinating to me because it took me getting divorced and getting in a new relationship where some of the same patterns started emerging. Because what I thought is I just need like a man, like a bigger man, a masculine man that can like, that's just like more masculine than me, which
who can outman you.
That's what I thought I needed. But the funny part is about when you're a superwoman is even when you get that man, you still start having the same patterns show up because I didn't change. I didn't shift. I didn't do any of my own internal work. And some of the same dynamics showed up. So then I went, oh, crap, it's me. Like, this is me. Because it can't be them. Like, this is me in my masculine, not giving space for anyone, but yet being so burnt out and so empty and so confused why no one wanted to help fill me up.
Right. Absolutely. And it's like all those things that we are told is what should do it for us is often the opposite. Like even the concept of having a tight pussy is like one of the biggest fallacies that like, it's like you said, like you want something that's like warm and soft and inviting, and like that like tightness is actually unhealthy and like comes from the rigidness and the like holding that
pussy for years, and it was painful sex, and I had to go to a pelvic floor physiotherapist.
Exactly. Exactly. We want a strong, articulate pussy, but not a tight one. Like, you know, when you hear of somebody being a tight ass, you're not like, oh, that sounds enjoyable. Like it's like this whole perspective that I think just, plays out in the way that we chase these goals. And we think about the way that we want the goal, like what the goal is, but not how we want the goal to feel. And that's something I've had to work on a lot with myself of like, okay, it's not just about checking off the box of achieving these numbers or hitting these milestones, but how did it feel to get there? What did you have to do to get there? Was it a pleasurable, enjoyable experience, or did you run yourself into the ground? So sure, you got to check the box off, but now you're like feeling like shit and in recovery again.
Right. We're in that loop. We're in the burnout cycle.
Yeah. And that like health versus wealth thing is something that has been a big part of my journey of really working hard on allowing health and wealth to support each other, recognizing that they are one and the same, that our health is our greatest wealth, but they can have a tendency to come at the expense of each other. And, you know, when I first got really sick, my medical bills were so high because I was not going through what my health insurance would cover. I was working with a naturopath, and it was like I started to get to the point where the stress of making enough money to pay my medical bills was like outweighing the actual effect that healing work was having on my body. And so then I'd be like, fuck it, I'm not going to work with anyone for a while. I'm going to do this myself. And then I would kind of swing to the other side and work on, just tending to one side or the other, either making money or tending to health. But it was like they were coming at the expense of each other, and bridging that gap has been a lifelong journey for me of like, how do you listen to the body and let that be the guiding force so that they support each other rather than coming at the expense of each other. And I think that's hard with the way we set our goals in this society.
The yang masculine goals, for sure. For sure. And then that
absolutely
kind of meeting point that I found in the clients that I work with, sex, health, wealth, like when we can hook that up, nurture that, then they're all going to like unravel together, or they're all going to build on each other and keep filling our cups. Because another thing that I was realizing with the women that I work with, successful women, entrepreneurs, professionals, etc., because they were these overfunctioners, they were not in very stable relationships, and neither was I, especially, and I mean stable, like energetically stable with like our over giving tendencies, because we're self-sacrificing, all the things. So that stress, so the burnout is going to get affected with our health. Our relationships are going to get eroded or affected in some way. And if we're constantly having the same fight, or we're constantly feeling alone and not supported, like that takes a ton of bandwidth in and of itself and is exhausting for both parties. And wealth wise, how are you showing up if you're burnt out at work or chasing after your mission? You're not as good as you could be. And you're probably spending a lot of money on the health and sex stuff, trying to fix that. So it's this downward spiral, or we can get it turning the other way.
Exactly. They all support each other, or they all come at the expense of each other, depending on how you're approaching it. Yeah, completely. And I think a huge piece of that is approaching all of them at a sustainable pace. It's like, if your goals are going to require you to run yourself into the ground to achieve them within the time frame you want, that's not going to be as sustainable for your health. And then ultimately it's not going to be sustainable for your wealth. And so, yeah, I think being realistic with ourselves around what feels good in our bodies and having that sustainable pace is so essential. And I think being realistic is a tricky thing. I know for me, I always think things are going to take a lot less time than they actually do, or that I can get more done in a day than I actually can in a way that feels good. So I think it's a really humbling to the truth of our bodies and to listening to, what is required to approach it in a way that is going to continue to feel juicy and nourishing, and not like, wow, I feel totally dried out after this.
And I talked to a client the other day, and she has this reoccurring knee injury, and she was on, like, it flared up, like, the systems, she kind of let slide, got burnt out, injured herself, and was on crutches. And she was angry that she was on crutches, and like angry that she wasn't at her regular pace instead of honoring it and being there. In the way I like to look at it, and the way that's worked best for me and my clients, is we're not trying to get rid of Superwoman and become this like ethereal, free-floating, feminine being. But what we are trying to do is have the resiliency and flexibility in our physical health, like on the cellular level, and in our mental health, to be able to do what the situation requires. So we might need to put our Superwoman cape on and crush it and get a business initiative done, or get a project completed over the line, nail a big client. We might need to do those things. But then
Right.
can we also rest and celebrate and nourish and support that process either during or after? So for me, it's that like flexibility and flow. Like, can I do what this situation
Yes.
requires, not at the expense of my health and my physical and mental health?
Right. Yeah, there's that adaptability there, and that flexibility is a piece of the feminine nature, being able to flow with it. And so it doesn't have to be this rigid way, because we do move through cycles, right? It's like we're not going to be as on in that ability to make that push maybe when we're coming up on our bleed as we will when we're in our ovulation, and recognizing that like we are going to show up in different ways throughout the month, and learning how to maximize each part of the cycle in the way that it's designed for. And so giving ourselves the rest in the time that's what's called for, and not having that, flip-flops where we're pushing against the natural rhythm of our body.
Exactly. That's the sweet spot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's so many beautiful metaphors for all of this, when we look at like what's not working, and we see it as a reflection of other pieces in our life. Like a woman who's having trouble orgasming is probably very likely having a hard time softening and letting go, and not like needing to micromanage and control everything. And orgasm is about surrender and letting go and softening. And so it's like we can take all these things that are happening in our bodies and the frustrating points in our life, and use them as mirrors and messengers to see like, where am I out of alignment, and what needs to be adjusted here, instead of being angry that like, yeah, now my knee is flaring up again. Like, well, that's actually just my body letting me know, like having my back, in the same way that you want a good friend to call you on your shit in the most loving way, but like to not let you get away with looping on the same thing over and over again.
It's so true. It's so true. So if we listen and we have the space, right? Because when we're so busy and we're doing so much, then a lot of the times it's just patching ourselves up, taking the Advil or drinking the wine at night to numb the feelings, or doing whatever just to get back to that pace that we think we should be sustaining.
Yeah, I had a really humbling experience with this last year, where I hadn't been acutely sick with like a cold or a flu or anything like that for 2 years. And then I got sick 3 times in 3 months, each one lasting for like 2.5 weeks at a time. And the third one was COVID. And the first 2 times I kept seeing clients because I was just seeing them virtually, but I was like a snotty mess while I was working with them. And it's like a reflection of that thing you were talking about, where it's like, we can be so overgiving that we're like, we're giving more to our clients than we are ourselves. We're not even coming from that full cup. We're prioritizing what we can give to them, rather than recognizing like, yeah, we need to also be giving to ourselves to really show up in the best way. So it's like, I made it through those first 2 times of getting sick, but like, because I didn't rest during them, finally my body was like, cool, you're getting COVID. And that was my first time having it. And I got, sick to the point where I was like, yeah, I can't actually work right now. And so it's like the third time's the charm. Okay, I'm listening.
Exactly.
I stayed in bed and watched Game of Thrones for a couple of weeks, but I think it's a really, hard lesson to learn, like what that actually is, to give ourselves grace in that situation, and to not talk ourselves into continuing to push in some way.
And I was hoping that would be a message that society would get, slowing down from COVID, but I feel like we've gone back, right? Where it was okay for people to be like, I'm sick, taking a few days off, and everyone was like, cool, no problem. Like, it was accepted to rest. And right. I feel like we're kind of like corporate culture and society in general, we're sort of moving back to the like push through it kind of thing again, which is sad.
Yeah, it's really that maintenance practice. And like you said, shifting the beliefs, because if you have a belief of like, oh, I can only slow down when we're in a world pandemic, then it's like, if you need an excuse for it, like I remember listening to Carolyn Miss speak, and she said how people will say like, oh, I'm going on a vacation, I'm so exhausted, and like try to like justify how bad they need the vacation. And she's like, well, don't go on a vacation when you're exhausted. Then you're just going to be exhausted the whole time. Like, go on a vacation when you feel good so you can actually enjoy it. Don't wait till the point where you're that burnt out.
And that's a Superwoman classic. Planning the vacation, getting the household and all of the things in order, maybe getting care for a pet or children, and like doing all the work leading up to the vacation. You go on the vacation and it takes so long to unwind that you probably weren't even off long enough to fully unwind. And then you're coming back to the rat race and the emails and like trying to pick up the slack from you as the overfunctioner not being there for that long. So I'll have clients say to me all the time, like, oh, I shouldn't have even, it's like, I shouldn't have even gone. Like my husband and I were fighting, like, or my kids, like, it's like, I shouldn't have even bothered, because you overfunction like the planning. And then because you're an overfunctioner, the mountain piles up. And then when you get back, there's so much to do.
Yeah. Exactly. It's like as soon as your nervous system started to settle, you're just up and back to your real life again. And one of my teachers always said to make sure you leave like a vacation after your vacation, like give yourself a couple days to come back and integrate before getting back into the real world.
It's so true.
Yeah.
I used to do that with medical conferences. So I'd fly somewhere, learn like all this amazing stuff, fly home, like last flight out on a Sunday evening, and then be back at work on the Monday. What?
Oh my God. No, it's awful.
Why would I do
awful.
that? So I started, you put in those buffer days, and I do it before and after vacation as well now. But that was something I had to learn the hard way.
Yeah. Buffers for me have been one of the most important things. Like with all my clients, I'm like, do not schedule something that ends at the minute that our call is supposed to end. Like give yourself at least a half hour, go pee, drink some water, eat some food, integrate, like let the work we just did sink in. And I see those people who are just like jumping right to the next thing. And I used to be like that. I used to be just like, shoving a granola bar down my throat as I ran to a pee break and texted somebody that I was running late. And it's just such an unhealthy way to function. And so I'm all about like the at least half hour minimum buffers in between everything I do. And like capping the amount of things I'll schedule.
It's such a game changer.
Yeah. What do you recommend for the women that just say that they like, this is something I see so often, that are just like, well, I can't make time for myself. I don't have it. Like literally, you don't understand the They're like, I don't even have 10 minutes to do this. What do you say to those women?
Well, I love talking to them. For one, and they don't even come to me anymore. I think just like energetically, but this used to happen a lot. And I used to get you don't get it because you're not a mom, because you don't run two businesses, because you're not a stepmother, because you're not like, but I'm all those things now. All of them. Like, so if there is a challenge of like, I can't make time because it's like, okay, well, me and me and me. So it's, if I can get them on the phone and then we end up having a laugh about it. But if like, just generally speaking to the listeners, not making time for yourself is an underlying self-worth issue. It's not feeling worthy of the time, of the space, of the money, of the energy, of whatever is required to make that time. And I get it, because I've been there. I didn't make the time to go to the dentist for years when I was a student and going, like, starting my business, like, no insurance. And I mean, I still don't have insurance, but like the point is, whatever, not having the time is just an excuse. It's always an excuse. It's a barrier. It's a block, and it's going to tell us something deeper about you and about where you need to go. And it's generally about worthiness and valuing yourself as a priority.
Yeah, I completely agree with this. There's always like something that we're trying to avoid if we're filling all the space. And, you know, that's another thing where it's like the kind of conversation of like scheduling versus spontaneity is kind of an interesting one too, because, you know, sometimes you have to tell busy couples like you need to schedule in time for your intimacy, and people can scoff at that. But it's like, well, if it's not happening, like if you, especially if there is like a wound around your intimacy, you will unconsciously fill all the spaces so that intimacy cannot spontaneously happen. And if there's a wound around your self-worth and doing something for yourself, you will unconsciously fill all the space and insist that your kids' laundry being folded more perfectly than your nanny can do for you, or something like this is more important than you taking that time for yourself. And so I think it's so important to schedule that time and to just give space for things to unfold. Even scheduling time in your schedule that's just like, this is agenda-less time where I just get to feel my body and be like, what do I want to do right now? And so even in like scheduling the self-care things, I think can still kind of be this like, well, I'm checking it off the to-do list. And I find it really helpful if it's more like, this is just like a 3-hour block where I have nothing planned, and whatever I choose to do in that moment is how I'm going to spend it, based upon how I feel, not based upon what I decided would be best for myself a week ago.
Which we don't know. And it's also okay that this isn't inherent or natural, right? That's why we have to teach it. I spend a month on this.
Right.
With the women that I work with, a month on space creating. It kind of 2 months actually, because then like scheduling and optimizing it around your cycle, if you're cycling, or the moon, if you're not, and how to have that, like we've got a masculine structure, which our Superwoman is like, okay, great. But then we bring the feminine flow. So having a block to do whatever, like maybe it is on a Friday afternoon before you're heading into the weekend, like, which I wouldn't recommend, but this would be a baby step, to clean up a few things that if you know that you got it done, you could feel so much better resting and relaxing on the weekend.
Right. Totally. And then being really protective of that space, because I've noticed that, you know, spaces love to be filled, and it's the most interesting thing how you can be like, oh, I'm going to start taking Saturdays off now, and this is my day to not work. And then suddenly you have like 3 clients. Can you please get me in on Saturday? And you get tested with like, how clear are you going to be in those boundaries and protecting that
and
space?
anytime we have the worthiness issue, we always have a boundary issue. So you put that, like you make that decision, you decide, and then there will be the tests, the boundary tests. So, and same thing, like how do you handle those from the feminine, from invitation, that kind of thing. And eventually when we're out of burnout and we're in a more balanced state, like if I say, hey, I'm sick, can we reschedule our call? It's like, of course, what do you need? Or, hey, I got asked to speak at this amazing event in a couple weeks. I need to reschedule your call. That's amazing. Is it recorded? Like, you know, so by us, like, cause that's, I find like another level still when you've integrated it and become it to the point that now that's what everyone's reflecting back to you, where we're not worried about what other people think, because our clients are lovely and the people that we worked with and interact with are amazing and understanding, and they're not like mirroring back our Superwoman shit to us anymore.
Right. that's the hugest thing is so often people say, well, I drew my boundaries, but they didn't respect them. And it's like, well, did you respect them yourself? Were you actually embodying those boundaries, or did you want other people to do that for you? And that's the biggest thing. It's we set the tone, we command that respect of our boundaries through the way that we care.
We will never be given anything that we couldn't first give to ourselves.
Right. Absolutely. So I have a question for you on, because so you are a mother now, and you have the step family, and you have the business, and you have the whole thing. And I know you read one of your old posts in your podcast episode about like, I am not a wife, or like, I've never been a wife in the way that like we paint the picture of the wife. And this is something that I see come up over and over again in myself and my own exploration of like, do I want to have kids one day? And of other women who I'm helping navigate these same kind of questions, who are these very powerful, driven women who have businesses and ideas that they want to birth into the world. And they also want to be mothers, but they don't want to, like, the housewife role is not for them. Like they are not designed to just be happy playing the domestic role. Some women are very happy playing that, and that's so beautiful. And like, that's a thing to be celebrated in and of itself. And it's not celebrated enough. And I think that is a huge purpose to serve in life. That is like, I think that's the thing. It's like to be a mother and run a family, that is such a huge purpose in and of itself. And so then adding on another purpose of a business to it, like, I don't know if all women are designed to straddle that and not end up going into overwhelm and burnout and super mom and this kind of thing, or if it's just a matter of like, like how maybe there is a way to do that is more in your feminine, without spreading too thin. Like, do you have anything to speak to of like, how do you straddle those worlds?
I am constantly redesigning, refining what works. So for example, choosing to breastfeed, I knew would get me, would just have me more attached to my daughter, right? Formula, other people can feed the baby. You have a little more freedom early on. But if you're free feeding every 2 hours or 4 hours, like, it's you're keeping a baby alive with your boobs. So for me, it was about creating and designing a life that I could see myself in and see it lighting me up. What that meant initially, because I was even more of a superwoman, and then being a mom softened me even more, expanded me even more into the feminine and the caregiving role, and seeing like the value in it. But initially, like, just being that like high-powered woman, I got shit to do, I don't think I need kids to slow me down kind of thing, were thoughts that I had for sure in the past. For years, I didn't even think I wanted children. But then it was through my divorce and my work with the feminine and my look at like, what do I really want? What does make me happy? And I started to have visions of this little curly blonde haired little girl that I was pushing on a swing. And that is something that my daughter and I do like multiple times a week, which is wild. We love our trips to the park. Yeah. So I definitely feel like this was aligned, meant to be kind of thing. But I knew I needed support. I knew that going into and just running my businesses, supporting my clients, that kind of stuff, I couldn't just take a year off. Like, it just wasn't, I could have if I wanted to, but that didn't feel aligned to me. So that meant that I needed a lot more support. I needed a nanny. I needed house cleaners. I needed an assistant. like a personal assistant to manage like a house manager.
Right.
I wanted those things because that meant for me, I got the best of everything. The best of being a mom, the best of being a partner, and the best of running businesses and being able to show up for my clients. And that's what worked for me. And I'm constantly, but the interesting part about it is then there was a little bit of time for my daughter and my stepchildren where we were both still like growing new businesses in the pandemic, my partner and I, and it was a lot of energy out. And I felt like our home was lacking a little bit of that heart. So then I chose to let go of other pieces of my business to allow me to step into that more caregiving role in the home. And something's a little different. Like you can have somebody else do something for you, but there's a difference in a meal you cook sometimes and the decor, how I would set things just so, or fold them in a way that like felt like a nurturing part, or just even the space to be there for the kids and for everyone and the emotional shit that comes up. So even what I thought it would look like to what it did look like to closing my medical clinic, because that's huge. I can cut a lot of overhead, give myself more time. I cut my team in half. Like I can do as much as affect as much change in less time and less time like devoted to a business, you know?
Right. Right. And so there's, again, that flexibility that you were talking about of like, because you can't actually know what it's going to be like to fold being a mom into your life until you're there. And then you have to tweak things and adjust things. But I think that delegating and asking for help is so important. You know, I really do believe it takes a village to raise a child, whether that's in the traditional sense or just in hiring help and having friends and family around and people that can support, because I don't think that our bodies are designed to do it all ourselves. I think it's incredibly unhealthy.
And I help women that are not in not in the situation that I've worked for. Like maybe you can't afford a nanny and cleaners and daycare and an assistant and all of those things, but we still can design it for the same outcome.
That was going to be my next question, actually, is what do you recommend for the women who, like we talked about, you've already kind of hit to that like bottom of the barrel, just like desert. You're already in that place where you are under-resourced energetically, financially. Maybe this is like the women who are dealing with chronic illness, the single mamas, the families that are just like way in over their heads, trying to keep up financially to raise their family. What do you recommend for those women that don't have the resource to delegate as much as they would be supported by?
Women are our biggest untapped resource, in my opinion. And we need to get ourselves right. Like if we want our families to have abundance and health and all of those things, that will never happen unless you prioritize yourself. So I would always look into it and go, okay, so are you really not resourced enough because your husband just bought a new motorcycle and your kid is playing some like really expensive sports situation and like you look at it and because she's a superwoman, all the money, and sometimes she's even like the higher earner in the partnership, but all the money is delegated elsewhere for other people. So sometimes it's like a perception of lack. But if it is truly lack, then two things. One, no one, and the biggest part of my work is tuning women back into their intuition. No one can tell you what you need next and what will heal you and heal your family and the generations of your family better than you. So I am constantly tuning women back into that voice that they've ignored. So even if it's listening, like, what do I need today to feel better? What do I need in the next 5 minutes to feel better? And it could be like a hug or a walk outside by myself for 10 minutes. Like it could be little things that don't cost any money, but we're asking for support. And that will start to get you in the right momentum and get your family in the right momentum. And then the second part of that is there is a network, a community of women that is feeling the exact same way that you are and is looking for the exact same kind of help. And you are smart and intelligent and you could figure it out. Like maybe a carpooling situation. Maybe you babysit your girlfriend's kids one night and she takes yours another. Like there are ways to get the support that you need and have it be a reciprocal situation where both people get their needs met and it feels good.
Yeah. I think it's a huge invitation to reinstill a sense of community because women have raised children together since the beginning of time. Like they are the web weavers, and we were not designed to do motherhood in isolation. And so I have a friend who shared with me that she has a group of mamas. I think a lot of them in the group are single mamas, and they have it to where I want to say it's once a week. There's like 6 of them in the group. And I think like 3 or 4 of them get together with all the kids. And then the other 2 or 3 women get to like go off and do things for themselves. And so it's like a beautiful situation because you still get to be with your sisters and socialize with them, but you're all tending to the kids together. You have that extra support. And then you have like your weekly rotation where you get to go do your own thing. So there's
so
plenty of
many
ways that
creative solutions
women can come together to really,
other.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that's super beautiful. I guess my last question before we wrap up would be, what about for the partners of the women who are in feminine burnout and, maybe they're feeling snipped at, maybe they're feeling like they haven't had sex in a long time. Maybe they feel ignored and undesired. Maybe they feel just on the back burner. Maybe they feel emasculated. Maybe like they've, been just kind of walked all over as she steps up into this place, this role. What do you recommend for the partners of these women in terms of how to support the women they love and navigate this situation?
For sure. So high level conceptually, because that's how I like to work on, like beliefs first and then action. She wants to fix it. She just doesn't know how. The tools that she has have gotten her where she's gotten to, the success in other areas, but she needs a different tool set for your relationship. And she doesn't have it. She wasn't programmed that way. She wants to fix it or else she wouldn't be with you.
Right.
But just she needs help. She needs a different kind of help. And the best way that I've found to, like, it depends. And sometimes I would approach this by love language. Sometimes I would approach this by relationship dynamic or like the rut that you're stuck in. But if you could show her you care, and I mean, if her love language is acts of service, help her do some things around the house. Ask what needs to get done. Do them. If her love language is physical touch, cuddle her, but don't expect the sex after. Don't do the chore. Yes. Don't do the cuddling to get sex, because giving to
don't treat it as a tit for tat.
That erodes the polarity. So you know, show her that you're there, show her you care, and get her to listen to my podcast, the Pleasure Principles podcast. Because if this stuff speaks to you and you're like, this is my wife to the T, and the woman that you met or the woman that she was before she started her business, before the baby, is not the same woman. Like, she's in there somewhere. We just need some different tools to excavate her out. And my podcast would be a great place to start.
Yes.
Approach it though, like, babe, I want to help. I don't know how. I heard this woman speak and I think she might speak to you. Like, give her like a invite too, right? We don't want to demand. We don't want to be like, you're such a crusty bitch. Like, you need to listen to this or I'm going to leave. Like, that probably won't go over too well, but tons and tons of resources on this stuff on my podcast.
Yes, I love it. And I think, what you suggested around like taking initiative to help without as like a doing to get kind of thing, because that's important, because then we slip into like the nice guy complex territory where like he's trying to do everything he can to please and appease, but it's coming with this kind of underlying expectation that he gets sex or something from it in return. And we want reciprocity in relationship. And so I think it's important that like as her partner, you take initiative to support where you can so that she can rest into her feminine more, so that like you are holding down more of that masculine energy. She can rest into that, but you're also not falling into the people pleasing trap of doing it at the expense of yourself, because then there's going to be more of that crusty resentment, and then she might be walking all over you, and that also kills polarity. So it's like each person being really self-responsible for taking care of themselves, but then, taking initiative to really guide and direct where she could, get some more space and some weight off her load.
And if she struggles to do it, if you are doing all the things and she is still struggling to take the space, to take the time to figure out what she wants and needs and how to ask for it, like, it's a bigger problem, right? Until she can do the work on herself to learn those things, then you could do whatever, you could try whatever, and it's gonna fall short constantly because she is not in touch enough with herself. So tell her to call me.
Yes, really good distinction. And speaking of calling you and your podcast, Jordin's podcast, The Pleasure Principles, is amazing. I definitely recommend checking it out if any of these themes resonate with you today. And how else can we dive into your world, Jordin?
I am mostly on Instagram at Dr Jordin Wiggins. So check me out there. Send me a message. I will. I answer my DMs myself.
Awesome. Beautiful. Do you have any programs or upcoming offerings or anything that you want to share?
Yes, actually, we are doing my year-long program for Superwoman in January. It's the Feminine Mentorship, and it is a group where we get to dive in and soften and kind of restore these set points, these patterns that we talked about. So I'm just updating like the content and our retreats and what I'm going to teach. And I'm so excited. I'm overjoyed. My heart could burst out of my chest. I love doing work in this way. And I'm so excited for all of the women that will join me on that journey. And it's a small group. We do like 12 women. It's super, super intimate, super transformative. So I can't wait.
I love that so much. That sounds incredible. Thank you so much for the work that you do, Jordin. It's been such a pleasure to have this conversation with you. And I think one thing I kind of want to drive home that I kind of meant to speak to through this episode, and I think we talked about it in so many ways, but just to sum it up is like, if you're not turned on by life and you're living in a way that is drying you out, you're also not going to be turned on in the bedroom. And so if you're having issues with your sexuality, if you're not finding joy in life, if you're feeling less than alive, these are all things that you want to look at, everything we talked about today. And if you need support in going deeper into that, please get in touch with Jordin. She's such a wealth of information and facilitates really powerful transformation. So please do follow her and continue to dive into her work. And thank you so much for all of your wisdom today, Jordin.
Thank you so much for this conversation. It was so fun. And I love that you get it. It feels so good to chat.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I really appreciate getting to have this conversation with a fellow Superwoman who has been through it all, and really appreciate how candidly you speak to all of this. So thank you for all of your generous sharing. Thank you, everyone, for joining Nectar, Sex, and Soul today. As always, please leave a review if you found this episode helpful and share it with those who you think would also find it helpful. Your participation in sharing this episode and getting the word out is how other people who could benefit can find us. It's a really powerful way to say thank you to us for the work that we do. So please do spread the word. I hope you got a lot out of this today, and wishing you all a really beautiful day. Ciao. Thank you so much for dropping into Nectar, Sex, and Soul with me today. It's been a pleasure to connect with you. If this episode lit you up or illuminated something impactful for you in some way, I invite you to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone you feel would love to hear it. To learn more about my work, check out SorayaLeonara.com, sign up for my newsletter, and follow me on Instagram and YouTube, where I share tons of free content, special offers, and ensure you're the first to know about my new offerings. I offer private coaching as well as courses, workshops, and retreats, so be sure to stay in touch if you'd like to go deeper together. Thank you, loves. Have a gorgeous day. Ciao.